So the final thing I want to do here with JavaScript is actually I want to even take these projects out and isolate them in their own in a separate file. And I want to do that with something called JSON files. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's a way of storing data that can easily be pulled into JavaScript. That's the design of it. It's used by a lot of languages, not just JavaScript anymore, but it was originally designed for JavaScript. So I'm going to create another new folder, and it's going to be called data. And then inside of here, I'll create a new file called, how about projects.json. Now, all this information here I'm going to take out and I'm going to put into projects.json. The issue is that it's slightly, well, first of all, sorry, I need to also get this array thing here. But anyway, put this in here. It looks good, except for I need to actually wrap all of these in quotes here, because the keys in this case in JSONs need to be wrapped in quotes. So I'm going to wrap these in quotes. Now, what I'm doing with VS Code is I select something, and then if I hit a quote, if I press Shift and then the quote key, it'll actually just put the quotes around the outside. So that way I don't have to type a single quote on one side, single quote on the other side. The other thing that JSON doesn't like is this extra comma at the end. It doesn't like having an extra comma. But now all of my data is here, and it's in a separate file, which means I need to get the data from this file and then load it into my divs. And that's going to require doing something called fetching. There's a function called fetch that actually will fetch data from a file. So let's create another function that's going to say fetch function fetch project data. Now inside of here, we're going to run a fetch function. And the fetch function is actually going to be fetching from that relative path data, and it was called projects.json. And what does fetch do? Well, fetch returns something called a promise. Now, what a promise is, we can think of it kind of like an egg. It's an egg that contains something, but we don't know what that something is yet. And the reason for that is it takes time to do certain things. It takes time to open a file, actually. It takes time to access data from a file. So the issue is that I can't do anything with that data until that egg hatches. If I just start doing more lines of code here, like let's say okay, this is my response equals this, and then I try to do something with the response, well, the response is based on this, and like if I try to do console log response, well, this line of code is going to run immediately after this one, but this line of code hasn't resolved the promise yet, so this is going to log a promise. It's not going to log the data that actually comes from this. So what I need to do instead is I need to wait for that stuff to be resolved. Now there's two different ways I can do this. There's a .then function that we can use, or we can await an asynchronous action. And I think in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use asynchronous function. So if I put async in front of the function, what this will give me access to is a keyword called await. And what await does is it will wait until that egg hatches before it moves on. So instead of going to this next line of code immediately, it's going to wait for that function to resolve and wait for that fetch to occur. So now I'm going to have this response, and now what I want to do is get the JSON data from the response. So I will await that as well. So I'll say data equals await r.json. And then what I'll do is I'll console log the data. Okay, now I'm just going to test this out by running this function now. Wow, it got the data. it actually got all that data from the, we can see that here as well. Well, main.js 56, we can see that that data has been logged now. Now, if I do this, it doesn't take a long time because it's a local file. It actually doesn't take very long to read it all, but it does take time technically. So now we have our data here that's being returned, the JSON data from this page right here. So I want to return that data. And basically what a return does in a function is it will, if I call this function, the return data will be what's represented by calling this function. So what do we do now? Well, I need to take all of this stuff that I did and put it into a different function, strangely enough. There's two ways to do this. I can actually run this function, but I actually like having something called onPageLoad. So I'm going to create another function here. It's going to be called setProjects. And the setProjects is actually going to take data, project data or whatever, as a parameter that's being passed in, which means we need to give it data. And then I'm going to take all of this stuff out here, all of this stuff that we did here. Oops. All of this stuff we did here, I'm going to take out, and I'm going to paste it into setProjects. And now, everywhere that I use the word projects, I will have to use data instead. Actually, no. What we can do is actually just use the word projects here. So I'm going to use the word projects here, and then I'm going to get rid of these projects because we don't need that anymore. It's all going to be stored in our JSON data. So I can use the word projects, and now anywhere that projects is used is right here. It's going to be, it's going to be the data that's passed in. So I have the data being returned here. I have my set projects here. So what I need to do is I need to call set projects, but I need to call it after the JSON data has been provided. Now, as I mentioned, there's two different ways that I can handle asynchronous data. I could make this an asynchronous function as well, or I can do something called .then. And I just want to give you an example of that. The way it works is when the promise is fulfilled, the data is going to be set, and then we're going to be able to do something with that data. So we're going to say the data is going to come in here, and then we're going to do something with that data. This is called a callback function. It just means that a function is being passed in as a parameter. But basically, the data is going to be here, and then I'm going to call my set projects on that data. Don't worry too much about the syntax right now. It's a little bit complicated. I just wanted to give you an example of promise.then, because this function, any asynchronous function, will automatically return a promise by default. So the fact that this function is asynchronous means that it takes time to run and it returns a promise. So with the promise we're doing .then, the data that's being returned is going to be sent to set projects, and it's going to be called projects, and that's going to place all of our projects in. And let's see, refresh. Look at that, all of our projects are here. Even though none of the projects exist here, they only exist in this JSON data. So let's just change some data here. We'll say my project, and we'll change this to a third project or something like that. And when I save this, it automatically updates. So basically, any time that you add a new project, all you have to do is update your JSON data here, and it will automatically take that and dynamically place it into your HTML content. It's just a really nice way of containing your data. You could also do that with a lot of stuff here. You could keep this in a JSON, in a separate JSON file, and grab that. That way you can just update it there. You can have this content in JSON. It's just a nice way of storing data. Another way this data is often stored, if you've done work with this kind of stuff before, is in MySQL. The reason I didn't use MySQL is because we're doing all this on the client side, and MySQL requires server-side interactions, and we're not there yet. I just wanted to give you a fairly straightforward example of using JavaScript to dynamically allot data, and this is a fairly common use case.